tonight.
It's time for another episode of Meet the Author podcast.
Tonight is a special edition of Meet the Author podcast, but just as enjoyable as all the other shows.
On these podcasts, you'll meet insightful authors.
And as always, you'll enjoy the casual conversations.
You can watch it live, or you can enjoy the show when you have time.
We're talking about books and the pangs of writing and publishing them.
Now, on with the show. Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Joan. We're really glad that you're here, whether you're watching us live, a special edition live, or if you're listening to it later on, we're really happy that you decided to join our audience. Oh, Chris Chrisman is in the house. Good evening, Chris. We're so glad that you could make it.
Good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while.
I know. Well, we haven't been on in a while.
That's true. Very true. Well said. Well said. So,
well, we're going to be at a book signing on Saturday, the 26th, in Tarpon Springs. So anybody in the area, please come. And
it's actually a book festival. All the streets are going to be blocked off and everything. And there's quite a few authors and artists that are going to be there.
Right.
Yeah. That's from 10 till 4 this coming Saturday at Tarpon Springs, Florida, if you're in the area.
And Missy will be with us.
Come by. Missy will sign.
And The Hill of Sacrificed Souls finally came out.
Yes.
Launched on the 20th.
Available on Amazon.
Yep.
Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about the book, or?
No.
No? Okay.
Chris says, how's the weather down there? The weather's been good. It's been cool in the mornings and, wicked hot in the afternoon, but.
Low 90s.
Yeah.
Oh, good. And here's George. Howdy. Somebody just called me geriatric. Like hell, I said. I don't even speak geriatric, but my Spanish is pretty good. Good, George.
Hello, George.
George. Hi, Nadine, if you're with George.
Yeah, hi.
I assume you are.
And all the woofies, all the doggies. Paul Hollis says, evening, Rob and
Hello,
Joan.
Paul.
Hello, Paul. Thank you for the wonderful review, by the way.
Yes.
Appreciated it. That was really good.
It was really good.
Chris Chrisman said, okay, now I'm with the gang.
There you go.
You moved over. Yeah, we can see you're on Facebook now.
There you go. So, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes, I do. Tonight we have a really interesting author. George, you can speak Spanish with her. You both can chat away in Spanish all you want. Her name is Amanda Quintero Aguerrevere, and she can correct me on that. She's the author of We Said Farewell. She is a Venezuelan national living in exile in Paris, France. She was worn down from the perpetual fear of seeing friends and family members abducted and threatened on a daily basis. She left Venezuela in 2016 to pursue a graduate degree at Sciences Po, Paris School of International Affairs, and never returned. An economist, writer, and international business strategist, she now channels her expertise into storytelling that highlights the human impact of political and economic forces.
So very timely. We'd like to welcome Amanda. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Joan. Hi, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for staying up so late. You're live from Paris, France, everybody. So kudos to you for staying up so late and still being awake.
That's it's my pleasure.
Chris Chrisman says, hola, Amanda. Chris Chrisman says, hola, Amanda. Yes. And George, you have nothing to say.
This is the first.
Oh,
There we go.
okay. George says encantado.
Hi, George.
She's delighted to meet you too, I'm sure. So let me bring up your website right here. So, those of you that are listening, that you're not watching this live or watching the YouTube video, her website is lesmotsdeamanda.com. And that's where people can get in touch with you, right, Amanda?
That's right, yes.
And do you have links to your social media or anything like that on there?
Up in there, yes. And they're the same handle.
Do you have like a newsletter or a blog spot or?
Not so far, no, just Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah, Instagram and TikTok. Okay. That's those are good things too. I felt like I wanted to show. Yes. All right. So the book that we're going to talk about tonight is We Said Farewell: Stories of Forced Exile. Another look at the Venezuelan diaspora or disbursement, if you will. And these are a number of stories, correct?
Those are 5 stories, yes.
5 stories, and they are all Venezuelans.
They're all Venezuelans. They all take place in Venezuela, although each of them migrated to a different place in the end. And they are mostly anchored in real facts and in real people. It's just they've been fictionalized for the purpose of reading.
Yeah. And so these 5 stories, is one of them your account or are they
No,
5 different accounts?
they're 5 different accounts, although you could say that in a way it's almost autofiction because half of the characters are in my age bracket and they lived in the same, like, let's call it literary universe. And so I know that those places very well. And there was, of course, a lot of my life projected into those characters. Yeah, for ambience or for adding examples, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And where did the 5 people end up in the stories?
Well, the first one kind of took a tour around the world. We met in Paris. Still lives in Paris. The second one lives in Madrid, Spain. The third one is now moving to northern Spain. The fourth is living in between Argentina and Miami, and the fifth in Mexico City.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
A few of them chose Spanish speaking countries, which was very smart, I'd have to say.
Well, it's definitely the easier path in some ways and the more difficult path in other ways, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, because the culture is very different.
The culture, I mean, if you go to another Hispanic world like Spain or Mexico, it is a common culture and common language, but also a huge part of the diaspora is there. It is a very present phenomenon. It's part of local politics because it splashes all over the place. So, especially the people who have migrated into South America have faced a lot of xenophobia. Whereas if you go to, like, for example, France, there's not a natural connection. And so you sort of create a language exile that creates a buffer between the storyline and your life.
I learned Spanish when I was in Mexico, and at that time I spoke it fluently. And I can remember when traveling by plane, and I would be seated near someone that spoke Spanish and didn't speak English. When we would converse, they'd always say, "Oh, you're from Mexico."
Yeah, you always pick up the accent of the place where you learn the language, right?
And the colloquialisms too, I believe, because those are different, I
Yeah.
think.
Oh, and Spanish is very diverse. 400 million speakers, so definitely the place where you learn it has an impact.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So, well, at least they didn't tell me I hablas como ranchera, so that's,
Mhm.
that's at least one thing.
That's
I
funny.
I had friends from Texas who lived there, and George, you'll appreciate this because George lives in Texas now, and they would try to speak Spanish with a Texan accent, and it was really funny.
Oh, that must
It
be
was,
very amusing.
uh-huh. Yeah, they'd say it with a southern drawl and be like, and my friends would say, "What did they just say?" And my girlfriend said, "Well, why do they understand you and they don't understand me?" I said, "Because you're speaking it like this."
Yes. But you know that I think that always happens. Like my whole career has been in international affairs, and you kind of like develop the ear to listen to the dialect that goes underneath. Like you can be speaking English, but unless it's someone that has been exposed extensively to a certain accent, you can usually pick up whatever they speak underneath. Like if you listen to a French person speaking English, you will hear the difference.
George said that's called Taxican.
Texican.
Yeah. That's true. And then some people speak Spanglish, so yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, I can imagine Florida.
Oh, oh yeah. Well, of course, we have Venezuelans, we have Cubans, we have Puerto Ricans, um, we have Mexicans, a lot of Mexicans. I'm trying to think, who am I leaving out? We have
Probably
wide,
Colombians,
Cuban, Puerto
yeah,
Rican.
not as
not as much.
we've known some Colombian. I don't think we have a very
Most of them are at
huge,
Disney World.
yeah, but
Tourists, a lot of
yeah,
tourists there.
a lot of tourists, but yeah, yeah. George said, "Oops, Texican," but yeah, we knew you meant Texican.
Yeah, unless you're calling a taxi. Yeah,
We knew what you meant.
you betcha.
But yeah, I don't think they're, because like anything else, when Cubans come here to live, they live together, you
Mm.
know, and the same with the Puerto Ricans, and the same with the Venezuelans, and um, Honduras. We have a lot of people here from Honduras, and I'm trying to think of a Colombian, but I don't think we have that many
I don't think so.
Colombian people that have migrated here. I don't think so,
Not that
but
we
maybe
know.
we do, and we just haven't met a lot of them. But we used to live in Miami, so we certainly knew a lot of Hispanic people.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
Uh, it was kind of like therapy, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just to put it into perspective, almost my entire generation left at the same time. Like the
Wow.
people who are millennials, we almost left in the span of 20 years. Like the entire generation went out. It was a quarter of the country within, yeah, 10 years, something like that, which represents about 8 million people. And so it's a very violent experience to not only have to immigrate yourself, because it's one thing when you go out and I don't know, look for adventures because you wanted to experience something different, than when there's this collapse and you sort of had to flee and everyone you know is fleeing. And I went on to study a master's in international relations. So for those 2 first years of my immigration process, there was a lot of conversation because everyone that I was studying with was interested and familiarized with the news, but from a very informed perspective, right? I mean, I was lucky enough that I was not going into that, because I've met other authors, other Venezuelan authors that went into a very different experience where they did face the xenophobia and they did face the more harsh rejection from the people from the places where they were arriving. I arrived into an extremely liberal environment with people from all over the world, so there was a lot of intellectual conversation about that, and everyone kept telling me, "Wow, it's something so underreported. Like, really, no one understands what is going on." Um, and coming from Venezuela, I had a particular path that sort of allowed me to tell that story in a certain way, because I started my writing journey at a project that belonged to the university where I used to work, the Research Institute for Social and Economic Studies at the university where I went. And this was the time when Obama was being elected, and Obama had a lot of success with blogs. And so they basically paid us, some like working students, to write a blog about what was happening in Venezuela. So I had blogged about Venezuela for about 10 years by the time I left the country. So I had been following the policy developments very closely. And a couple of years before leaving, I worked for a presidential candidate back then who ended up being in jail. And we wrote together, well, I researched slash ghost wrote the book, part of the book. And it was a review of the 20th century and kind of like the study of the policy changes in a very technical way. And that experience was very frustrating because it was a lot of research that ended up being read by almost no one. So
Yeah.
you can imagine the combination of having all of that knowledge and facing my own process, facing those conversations with the people I was studying with. And so at some point I came up with the idea of documenting. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to channel all that experience into a timestamp that sort of left an account of how I lived it and how people that I know lived it in a way that would illustrate the bigger picture. Because what is happening in the book is that you have 5 stories. They are self-contained, but they are chronological. And so through the journey of reading the 5 stories, you can sort of understand how the collapse unfolded. And that's kind of like how I got inspired to write the book. Then after that, it was like more the making of it.
Right. You had to do all this research and you had to relive all of that.
Yeah.
And then nobody read it. So you were like, okay, let's put this out there for people that will want to read it and can read it and can better
Yeah.
understand.
Also, that was why I chose to do it in fiction form.
Mhm.
Because in general, human beings understand stories in a way that's a lot more powerful than reading nonfiction. I'm a big fan of nonfiction. I read about 3 or 4 books per month, and I would say 50% of everything I read is nonfiction. But I understand the power of story, and that as humans, when we connect with the lived experience of some other person, it's a lot more powerful. And one thing that one of the interviewees told me really changed me and convinced me to write it in fiction form. He has probably the most difficult story because he was abducted by, to draw a crazy parallel, but like the SS or the Gestapo of Venezuela, like the political police, and he was abducted and put into this Guantanamo style of prison, tortured and everything. And when he escaped and he went to Argentina and he did his refugee status, he told me that he felt like a number. Like the most difficult part of being a survivalist, something like that, was feeling like it had been dehumanized, and that the entire process of recounting it and doing the legal procedures was very clinical, legalistic, sterile, and that he hadn't found a way to make it human. So my goal when I heard that was to make it as easy to connect with the narrative as possible.
To humanize it,
Yes,
to humanize the story. Yeah.
absolutely.
And that had to be difficult too,
That was
because
super
you lived
difficult
it.
because actually, so what I did first was I spent like 5 years writing book, about a year with each story. So I would first do an interview, and then I would sort of create a first storyline. So I wrote the book a first time, sort of in third person, kind of like an omniscient narrator. And
Yeah.
then when I reread it, I realized that it was not as easy to connect with that form of narrator. So I rewrote it in first person. And that was so difficult because it meant putting myself in the flesh of those people as they were living through very difficult situations. From, like being fired from a government job for your political beliefs, which is infuriating, but then to be tortured is quite something else, or being kidnapped is quite something else. So yes, it took me a long time to write because I couldn't really go fast with it. Like the experience was super intense, so I had to take breaks constantly.
Yeah. And this was all about Chavez, when Chavez came into.
So the period it goes from Chavez to Maduro, actually, because it
Who was
begins
his vice president, right?
with the current president, and he
Was
was
the vice president of Chavez?
yeah, and then he stayed as president, has been president since Chavez died in 2013, so
Yeah.
not negligible. So the book goes from 2000 to 2016, around, or 17, something like that. And you do see the transition, and there is commentary about the changes that came with the change in regime.
Yeah. Well, it sounds really difficult. When you left, um, did you immediately go to Paris, where you are now, or did you go
Yeah,
somewhere else first?
no,
Or
I went immediately to Paris. I immigrated through studies, basically. I registered to do a master's, knowing that I didn't want to go back. I didn't know exactly that I was going to stay in France, but after you leave the country and you try to stay somewhere else, you realize the difficulty of actually going through with visa processes. And so it's a lot more cumbersome than you imagine. And then the pandemic came. So that was also like a big chunk of time that sort of made it into a longer stay.
yeah, that kind of upset the whole world, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's just the way everyone had to live with the pandemic.
Yep, 5 years.
Yeah.
Oh, it was really difficult. Um, so you speak very good English. Did you learn English when you were in Venezuela, or?
Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, actually, I did learn English probably as a child, but also I lived in the States when I was a teenager. I did a
Oh,
cultural exchange, so one of those like exchange years in San Diego, California, a long
yeah.
time ago.
Did you have fun?
So much fun.
I love we used to live near San Diego. We used to live in between San Diego and Los Angeles. And
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful part of the
San
world.
Diego is really beautiful. I really love San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love being on the water down there.
Yeah.
I really like it. The
And people are
shopping
wonderful. I mean, I know some people don't like Californians, but I am a big fan.
and oh, Chris Crispin says we had a Brazilian girl as an exchange student back in 1973. That's awesome, Chris. That was fun, I'm sure.
That is actually this, like we actually did an exchange. Like someone came to my house back in Venezuela, and yeah, it's a pretty cool type of program if you're the kind of teenager that wants to go for that kind of crazy adventure. I'm not sure because I did my exchange probably 2003 or 4. So it was before like voice over email and social media was really around. So it was really isolated. Like you were not connected to your parents for an entire year. That was something crazy to do at the age of 16.
So, did you ever go to the San Diego Zoo or the safari park, the San Diego Safari Park that was part of the zoo?
I did, but this was like 20 years ago or something.
Yeah.
So but I do remember it. It was quite spectacular.
Yeah, we had an annual pass there. We used to practically live there. We kind of love animals. Chris Chrisman said culture exchange is good. It is good.
So did you have to leave family in Venezuela?
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, they all migrated in time. But at that point, it was one of those like save yourself sort of situation. Really, especially because it was easier for my generation to leave and then like the parent generation to figure it out later. But it was a collapse, honestly. What in the background for you to have like a frame of reference, in the background, Venezuela defaulted on its external debt. That's what happened in 2015-16. And the closest thing that you can find in history is the former Soviet Union falling in terms of economic repercussions. So there was a near famine. I mean, there wasn't a proper famine because people started walking to the border in Colombia, taking boats all over the Caribbean, um, to the point that even indigenous tribes started moving around the border with Brazil at that point. Around my house, we started seeing something that we had never seen. Like Venezuela used to be a very prosperous place, and we
Yeah.
started seeing families picking scraps of food from the garbage and foraging in the mountains. Like really, there were people going to the rivers to take water. It was like a general collapse. So in that context, many people left with whatever opportunities they had. So it didn't happen in a sort of like you would say organized way. It was very much like I have this passport or I got this scholarship or I'm gonna go see what happens with this cousin over there. So I left with my master's program, also because I was lucky enough in Venezuela to work for a development bank that paid in dollars and I had the savings for it. But yeah, like my brothers moved to different places, then my mom moved to somewhere else. And it's like now 10 years later that we're sort of like trying to regroup. But yeah, and that happened to almost all my friends.
That's really sad.
Very sad.
And you know what, when I think about it, it's not just sad because you in the end you remake your life. Like when you leave and you burn your ships, you'll find a way to make a living and to rebuild yourself and everything. But the consequences of one country losing an entire generation, that is the kind of thing that lasts for generations moving forward, because like it's kind of like the equivalent of, I don't know, the Paraguayan wars when they lost like half of the men or something. Like it's one of those things that really it takes decades to rebuild, because then you're gonna have a gap. Like right now, all of my friends from grade school, high school, university, all of my job, like my job time, everything, that everyone I knew in Venezuela does not live in Venezuela anymore. Some of them have their parents over there. Some of them have started to bring their parents wherever they are. And so you have this gap. I do know a couple of people who stayed for whatever reasons, and they tell you, like, we don't have friends. Like, we literally do not have people to hang out with. Because there are no people between the ages of 30 and 40 years old. It's like they left.
Yeah. And that would be 10 years of people not having families and things like that either.
Yeah, I mean, families become scattered. I mean, I do
I
think,
mean, like people wouldn't be marrying and having children if the whole age group left. There's going to be a 10-year gap
yeah,
of no children being born to that age group.
among other things, because
I
then
mean, there will
once
be children born older and younger than that, but
yeah,
those people are gone, so they can't have children there.
not only that, because it creates, when you have that magnitude, like 1/4 of the country leave, what happens is that you create this sort of expectation. It's kind of like, imagine Ireland back in the day when everyone wanted to leave to the States. It's like it becomes a natural goal of everyone who's younger to also leave because the people above them left. So it creates this cycle of, well, there's no new possibilities, there's no opportunities here. And these people left, so I'm also going to leave. And so it creates this like human movement that lingers.
Um, I come from a family that migrated to the United States from Ireland, and you know, and so there are family letters between the people that were left there and the people that moved to America, and the people that moved to America sent money to those people that were back home because that was the kind of thing that was. That was two different potato famines.
Hmm.
And so there was that reason, wasn't a political reason. And so there was never that loss of family that way. You know what I mean? Because there was always that connection constantly, constant letters going back and forth. And though some people, I know that some people got lost in the transition because part of my family went to Australia and part came to the United States. And so then those two parts of the family didn't get back together until my sister did some research and found the part of the family that had moved to Australia. But
Yeah,
so
because
there's things like that.
they resettle and they have children there, and you're still, there generations later. Your children are there, your grandchildren are there. So it,
Mm-hmm.
like, presumably none of you is ever going to go back to Ireland.
Mm-mm.
That's the thing of the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think so. I think a lot of us would like to have dual citizenship, and a lot of um, Americans of Irish descent do have dual citizenship, and it's something we've considered. Just makes life easier if you have two passports,
Oh
and,
yeah.
and so it is something we've talked about. I would be the only one that could do that in my family because our children are too many generations removed from the people who came over. So, yeah. But well, I mean, I'd be the only one in my family. My siblings, of course, could do the same thing if they wanted to. But yeah, it is something we've all talked about, but haven't done. So I guess it's not that important to us. But yeah, so now you're going to have um, all of these Venezuelans who've now dispersed all over the world and are now setting up generation there, and that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see anyone going back, also because when you leave a country in the conditions that probably your family left or my family left, you have no desire to go back. Like, that is, it's too painful. Like, you really had to uproot yourself and recreate a life. And so the healthiest way to do that is to mourn it, to grieve it, and to like take root in your new place.
Well, I think it was very different because my grandparents did go back, and on both sides they went back. Uh, two of our daughters have gone, and and I I would imagine the Venezuelan culture would be very similar. That once your family, your family. So it doesn't matter how many cousins removed you are, but you go back, your family. So
Oh
they
yeah,
have.
no, I don't mean going back as in like visiting. I mean going back as relocating back to the country.
Oh
Like,
no,
Yeah,
I
taking,
don't think
yeah.
any of my family would. Well, I
Maybe.
take that back. Some of our family does want to relocate there, but um, yeah. I mean, my parents talked about it all the time, but they never did it. So, and that is because, their children and grandchildren were here, and the same for us. We have children and grandchildren and now great grandchildren, so we're not going anywhere.
and one thing that I've learned from being a first generation migrant is that you vote with your feet,
Yes.
and that you will see things very clearly in where you want your children or grandchildren to grow up. Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a very difficult time imagining anyone who would tell me right now, "Oh, I want my children to grow up in Venezuela." Like, what? I don't see
Yeah.
that happening at all, because it's not a safe place. It's not somewhere where, you can see people flourish and have opportunities, or even like escape uh, insecurity. It's one of those things.
Because even though it's Maduro and it's no longer Chavez, it's the same regime. So it would be going back to the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Venezuela had a thing, and that I describe it in the book, especially between stories 3 and 4, where it went over a threshold that is no longer political, in the sense that it was a political project. It became an authoritarian regime, but then it became entangled with the cocaine cartels. And so now you have a balance of power and a set of incentives of people who are in the government and close to the government that is very different. I mean, they are not interested in elections, protests, normal economy, not even oil, that has been the staple of the Venezuelan economy for a century, like over a century. Even that has declined because the government became so entangled with different sorts of mafias that the country sort of devolved into a feudal state. That's how I like to describe it. And so you have these lords ruling over different parts of the country. The government lost control of the territory in a way, and is now being governed through the mafia structures. And when you fall into that mafia structure, you lost any basis for democracy at all. It's no longer just the authoritarian regime. They got there through a series of steps that I also cover in the book. There was a constitutional crisis. The government rearranged powers to serve the executive power more than any of the other branches. Everything started relying more and more and more onto the figure of the president. All of that was done under Chavez, who was an extremely charismatic person, very popular. He really had the votes back in the day, and he did all these institutional changes on the back of his own personality. He always had over 60% of the vote whenever he did it. But people who were in the opposition would say, like, it's not normal that you remove a Supreme Court justice. Like, it's not normal just because they're not on your side. So there was a slow burn in the institutional change. And then when the government became involved, and that's mostly on the Maduro side, once Chavez dies and their charismatic speaker is no longer the front of the movement, they have to resort to other means, mostly violence. So they started opening violence towards the population. They start using the military against protesters, killing people, kidnapping people, taking them into political prisons. And then eventually they became entangled with these like mafias. It's been all over the news in the States right now with the Tren de Aragua. That is one of the biggest mafias that came out of this crazy entanglement.
Okay, yeah.
And so now you have this feudal state that is not just about changing a candidate. It has entered into something different that will take, I don't know what kind of power to shake it up.
I didn't realize that was a Venezuelan cartel.
Yes, it's
Uh-huh.
it's one of the newer cartels.
Yeah. Well, so in this book, we said farewell, and that's the story of 5 expats who have moved to different parts of the world, why they left there, what that journey was like. Now you have another book that's coming out when?
That's right, May 5th.
May 5th, pretty soon.
That
And
is
it's
right.
called Unfiltered from the Feed to the Page, Stories of Wanderlust. You want it, that one looks maybe like happier.
A little lighter side, yeah.
Wildly different. That literally has nothing to do with what we just talked about. That is a collection of 30 travel stories and 5 or 6 poems. So it's auto creative nonfiction. And yeah, it's a book about travel. It's mostly humor. It's mostly humor based. They're just funny anecdotes that happen because I've had a lot of work travel related life. It's just things that I collected over the years. I think they span over a decade. Well, about the time that I've been living in Europe, yeah. So like let's say from 2015 to 2025. And it's just like funny things that happened. Some of them
Great.
they're categorized. So some of them are about losing things on the road, some of them are about living in Paris, some of them are about,
And Joe just posted this while I was looking for your new cover. Sounds similar to what could happen here based on our leader. You're not talking about the travel stories.
No.
no, I don't think so. I think he was talking about we
The
said fair.
disbursement, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a scary thing. The
Yeah.
whole thing is
That,
scary.
that is a very scary read. I've had especially for someone who's not familiar with the topic. But I've had many people tell me, many people at this point, there's like, I don't know, 300 people that have read it. Let's say 200 of them are people that I know. Most of them have told me that they've had to read it in less than a week because it is so crazy. The stories are so insane and painful that they had to get through it just to end the pain, to like know what happened. It's not a read for every taste, but if you like political thriller, that's kind of like what you're gonna get. Whereas the other one, Unfiltered, it's kind of like David Sedaris. It's like, like this crazy, neurotic, like self-reflective, overly observant narratives.
That's why I wanted to bring up your second book, because your first book is pretty heavy and terrifying to see a country taken over by drug cartels, literally, is what you were saying, is that's pretty scary. And so then I knew that you had just finished writing this one and that it'll be published pretty soon. And I thought, this must have been so much happier for you to write.
So much. Well,
And so
also,
much.
so the subtitle is From the Feet to the Page because I had that idea about 10 years ago. And so I've been collecting those in my private Instagram. So actually, they were originally just like very short captions for my Instagram page. And so like they're actually very short. They are like 3 pages max, like really short stories. And they're very like snappy. They have hashtags. It's yeah, I've been writing it for years now. It's been a lot of fun.
Joe Conjal says, "Hi, Amanda. You may have already said this before I joined, but do you have a publisher or are you self-published?"
I am self-published. Both of them are self-published on Amazon.
And Chris Chrisman says about the new one, great cover. She's saying, "Where am I again?"
Yeah, it was a very funny photo session because I was getting that photo session done for the former book, and for whatever reason, I was doing it on film. Like we only had 24 pictures, and this was one of the 24.
I like it.
Imagine paying
Like,
$200 for 24 pictures, and this is one of them. So I decided I would honor that picture with of the next book.
Yeah. Yeah. But that must have been so much more fun to write then.
Absolutely. No, that one was a delight.
But your first book had to be cathartic. It had to be, good to get that written, right?
It was a grieving process. I wrote it in Spanish first,
Mhm.
and then I did the translation myself. Definitely, it was kind of like putting the nails on the coffin. It was like, we are done with this. Like, it was super cathartic. Every Venezuelan that I know who's read it has told me that they had the same experience reading it. Like, I can put this to rest now. It was difficult, but I am over it. Whereas the other one was more like for the pleasure of capturing little moments of travel and yeah, kind of like turning it into more like general anecdotes that people can take a bite or two out of.
Joe Conjal said, "What do you do to market your books?"
Well, I do this. I come up in podcasts and conversations. I have organized, I think, 4 in-person events in Paris and in Madrid. I have 2, like an Instagram account, a TikTok account. I'm not great at TikTok. That TikTok is very difficult algorithm.
Yeah.
Very difficult. So yeah, I've done it. I've done it in English and Spanish. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
You should consider LinkedIn.
I do actually. I do, but LinkedIn. So I was on a sabbatical the past year, and I chronicled my weekly updates on LinkedIn, which got a lot of traction. I was surprised about the traction, but because it's mostly my professional network, the overlap with the book has been a bit crazy. But yeah.
But you should use that now that you have all of those followers on LinkedIn to sell your book, because that is a great place. We get a lot of traction on LinkedIn. A lot of authors are on there, and they're actually interested in your book. So
Actually, I should wrap up that. It's good advice.
Yes, it is good advice. Trust me. Okay. Joe would like to know, what's been the most effective for you, do you think?
For promoting the book?
Yes, and I know what you're going to say already.
We were talking about this right before
Yeah,
going
that's why I know.
I would say depends on what you like. What is your goal? Like what's your KPI? For sales, it was in-person events, 100%. Like 100%, 20 copies, 30 copies, 50 copies in one, like in book signings. After that, probably my social media. I brought a lot of people from my personal to my author account at the beginning. But going over that, like going out after your first circle, has been really difficult. So I first tried with different formats. I did some lives that didn't go very well. So I'm trying to reach out through other people's audiences right now. It brings different publics, definitely, but there's no silver bullet, I would say. And I think it wildly depends on the topic of your book.
So you've been writing a lot for a long time, different forms of writing and different formats, shall we say? Okay. How about writing just a fiction book, like, a romance or a mystery or the science fiction or anything? Would you consider that?
Yeah, for
Children's stories.
sure. I spent the last 4 years in a creative writing workshop with other authors. A lot of ideas came from there. I did explore several formats that I would have never thought about. I definitely would love it, but the honest truth is that I had these two projects going on for such a long time that I'm not out of the woods with getting them out of my head. Like I haven't had the time to think about what it is that I want to write next. But yeah, I think that's somewhere in the future.
Yeah, I encourage you to challenge yourself to try that. Even just do a short story about something that maybe you'd never do. I know this because we belong to an authors group too, the Underground Authors, and we've all been challenged, and some of us are going to be writing a different genre than we have been writing. And at first, when you think about it, it's like, I don't know how to do that. Just like you said, you're in your head and you know what all this stuff is in there because it's been in there forever, right? And then it's like, now, okay, now we're going to go this direction. And you're like, I don't know that road. And I'm not sure if I speak that language.
Yeah, it's definitely that. But it was the same. Like when I set out to do We Said Farewell, I had never written long form. All I had written was blog posts, which was like very short form.
Yeah.
And when I started writing Unfiltered, I I was being very careful about what I shared. Like at the beginning, it was like, okay, I'm just gonna do the most sanitized type of stories. And the more the more I kept going, the more transparent they became. And those are definitely the best in the book. So there's definitely that part of committing yourself to the idea that you can do it and then going and trying to find out how to do it.
Hmm. Hmm. Exactly.
Especially in for the second one for Unfiltered, in the meantime, I started doing improv and I took some comedy
Oh.
writing classes. And so like I actually took some comedy skit writing classes. And so there's a lot of them that are using those formats that
Yeah,
I
I can
I
see
would
that.
have never thought that I would do that.
I can see why that would be so. Joe Conjal said it's like starting all over as an author, Joan. Yes, Joe, it is. That's exactly what it is. Joe and Paul, who you bet most of them are a part of the Underground Authors, and so I I can remember saying to the group, I I don't think I could ever write science fiction. I just I don't think that I could. Um, and everybody was like, well, a lot of people agreed, like they didn't think they could do it, but other people said it's the same thing as anything else. You think the same way, same format, and that kind of thing, and that's true. So
I do think though that is something that you should enjoy. Like
I love reading science fiction, so that's why, and I love science fiction. I mean, I've been reading science fiction. I'm trying to think of when I read my first science fiction book. I'm going to say back in the late 1950s, early 1960s. So I really like science fiction, and I've read it for many years, and I also love watching science fiction movies and fantasy movies and stuff. So you would think that was something that I would enjoy. But I have to say that murder mysteries have always been a big part of my life. I like a lot of the classical authors, that you can think of, Agatha Christie and people like that. So, you know, and that's just been easy for me to write. Maybe
Yeah,
because
but I did mean consume. Like I think it's kind of it has to be a genre that you like to consume. Like I like to consume dystopian. So even though it was hard to write, we said very well, it would be something that I would read because I like historic fiction, I like political thriller, I like dystopian. So it wasn't like completely far-fetched.
now, see, I love historical fiction also. I read a lot. So I've read a lot of murder mysteries and science fiction and fantasy and historical fiction. I love historical fiction. I love accurate historical fiction so that you can learn about the history, and it's like you're taking your medicine with a spoonful of sugar, because there's also this story that's interwoven in there that you're now learning about history as you're reading this fascinating story, right? And I do like a lot of dystopian type books, things like Hunger Games and
Yeah.
that type of genre. I love all of that too.
At least that's my policy because if you decide to write a book, you're going to spend so much time on that. that it's kind of like writing a
True.
thesis when you're in a PhD. Like you have to be obsessed.
Yes, it's yes. And then you're going to reread that book, especially as an indie author, very many times
Very many
to rewrite and go over it over and over again until finally you're like, I never want to see this book again.
times. Like I know those books in and out. I don't even have to read it. I can open a page, see one letter, and just know the entire page.
Exactly. All indie authors agree with you. It's
Yeah.
really, really difficult. Now, what we do find when we're writing fiction, because we're writing fiction, um, we find that our characters take over the story. Oh, Chris Chrisman goes, the end. Yes, exactly. It is the end of the book, and it's the end. But you'll be maybe wanting the story to go one way, and the characters have decided, well, it's actually going to go this direction. And so I don't know if you would have found that in writing the way that you've written,
Oh, I
because
definitely agree. Like it doesn't happen with myself. Like if I'm writing about myself, I'm
that's
just
anecdotal. Yeah.
it's anecdotal, exactly. But with the with writing other people, definitely I did experience that. Like there's some mystery happening there. It just the story takes over, and at some point you kind of like channel it. That's the
It
closest
does.
thing that I can explain.
It really does. It's amazing, isn't it? It's really an amazing thing. And I think if you've never written, perhaps this would sound crazy to anyone listening, but it really is. Yeah, it is really true. Your characters are like, nope, we're really going to do this.
Yes.
Oh, George. George said, so do you have a poodle? I mean, if you're living in Paris.
I don't.
Yeah. Well, you'll need to get one.
I'm pretty allergic. I don't
Well,
have I don't have
Poodles
this.
are non-allergenic.
they're
That's
not
the
poodles are
wonderful thing about
non-allergenic.
poodles.
Maybe she's allergic to walking the dog.
Yeah. It'd be like owning a dog in New York City. It'd
Yeah,
be
be
a lot
difficult.
of work. Yeah.
It is a lot of work. Absolutely.
So
Not
it
the
is
same
what
as living
going
out in the
on
country.
2 o'clock there or 3 o'clock?
It is
Oh, we need to say good night to you.
Yeah, you've been
A trooper.
a trooper, and really thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to encourage everybody to pick up a copy of We Said Farewell. Sounds like a really well structured book.
Mm-hmm.
And very informative. And then coming out,
I really like your picture.
What date is that? May
5th,
May
Cinco
5th.
de Mayo.
Okay, Cinco de Mayo. There you go.
Yeah, it's we all heard about Chavez and what was going on there, but to see firsthand is
right.
Really cool.
George says this is one of your best interviews ever. That's for sure. Thank you, George.
Very kind.
Good night, and thank you for staying up late, Amanda. Chris Chrisman says.
Thank you all for having me and for being a live audience.
Yes, our audience is the best. They're all intelligent and well-read and know what they're talking about. So
that's for sure.
Yeah, it was a very good interview. I'm sorry that you lived through that, and I think it would behoove people to read about what happened and to understand it and see what that was like. It's interesting that you likened it to the Soviet Union falling apart, but we did all see that when that happened was they had no milk, they had no toilet paper, they had nothing. Yeah. Very interesting show, Joe Conjal says. Thanks, Amanda, and of course, Robin Joan. Thank you,
You're
Joe.
welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Sure.
Paul Hollis says, fascinating interview. Thanks, Joan, Rob, and Amanda. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody, for hanging in there tonight.
I know.
Especially you, Amanda.
For most of us, it's much earlier in the night than it is for you. I'm sorry.
Sorry, this is my own doing.
Well, I hope you have great success with your book and your next one also, and keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
You too.
You too.
Good night, everybody.